I really like Rocket Raccoon. Like, really, really like him. It all started in 2011 when I saw he was a playable character in Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And since then, I read all 400 comics in which he's appeared, wrote the 40,000 words long article on the Marvel database about him, and even had mail I sent to his books see print on the letter pages at the back. Rocket's appearance in that video game, and in a few cartoons before the movie came out,
Better look behind you, mate.
was all thanks to a single comic book series, the 2008 Guardians of the Galaxy title, written by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning. It was an obscure niche title that didn't last long, but its incredibly imaginative ideas and deep ties with decades-long lore and storylines dating back to the 70s made sure it was never forgotten. Suffice to say, when I heard a movie was announced, I was elated. When the first poster came out and the tagline was, "You're welcome," I was one of those weirdos who knew of the characters beforehand that director James Gunn was saying, "You're welcome" to. I remember when the first trailer came out. I saved the clip of Rocket shooting his weapon on top of Groot as a GIF, and would watch on loop, open-mouthed, in awe at seeing the little guy having come to life. When the movie finally came out, and the scene from the GIF happened in full IMAX glory, I cried, overwhelmed at seeing my dreams come true. And yeah, I liked the movie. With it, and its astounding success, it was announced the comic book would come back to life with new stories. And not only that, it would spearhead an entire line of secondary titles, with most members of the team getting their own series or miniseries. I was in heaven. Until I wasn't. Because the character I saw in those new comics wasn't the same one I loved from Abnett and Lanning. And because most readers had jumped on after the movie, nobody seemed to notice. Rocket was stripped away of his original personality, turning him into the opposite of what he was, which is basically what the movie version was. Movie Rocket was moving. I'm not denying or decrying that. But this tragic, lawless character had little to do with the good-natured ranger the character was created as. And the comics swapping these two versions all willy-nilly not only had dubious implications regarding creative integrity, since the change was made only to follow what was the more popular medium, while explicitly ignoring established continuity, but was dark within the character's fictional biography as well. Rocky lost his moral code, and with it, his happiness. That the character shifted personalities abruptly went unexplained for years. Until a third take came along, one that combined the two contradictory versions into one coherent narrative. Let's start at the beginning. I've already mentioned Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, who defined the modern Rocket. The other two main players in this story are Brian Michael Bendis, who wrote the new Guardians book after the movie, and Al Ewing, who synthesized these two conflicting characterizations into one consistent arc. Rocket's evolution follows Hegelian dialectics, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, as I will show. Rocket Raccoon first appeared in 1976, inside the pages of Marvel Preview Issue 7, written by Bill Mantlo and drawn by Keith Giffen. "Remember the old Beatles song Rocky Raccoon?" said Giffen. "I think that was part of the inspiration. I think we were trying to do our version of Howard the Duck. You know, wink wink, nudge nudge. He was a throwaway gag. But like most throwaway gags, it started making money." End quote. Marvel Preview wasn't part of the main Marvel universe. It took 6 years before Rocket officially joined the superhero continuity in 1982, within Incredible Hulk issue 271. 3 years later, he received a solo miniseries that detailed his origin. He was a ranger from planet Half-World, a colony for the mentally ill. He was tasked with protecting the inmates. He leaves the planet at the end of the series, ready to explore the bigger Marvel universe. However, he was not immediately popular. The character only appeared in a total of 10 comics in his first 30 years of existence. Nevertheless, these comics possessed a comedic, whimsical tone. Rocket fought against colorful killer clowns, protected the innocent, and had a single girlfriend he faithfully loved, Lila the Otter. Rocket didn't flourish until 2007, when a ragtag group of unlikely allies got together in the pages of a mini-series called Star-Lord. written by Rocket's co-creator Keith Giffen. Rocket's place in the team was picked by the series editor, Bill Roseman. Quote, "It's a raccoon with a jetpack and a laser gun. What's not cool about that?" End quote. Giffen used to complain that he didn't have much to do with Rocket's development. Quote, "I'm credited with creating the character when all I did was draw a raccoon." End quote. However, now he had the chance to script him, and he gave birth to the raccoon's iconic friendship with the anthropomorphic tree Groot. Quote, "Hey, one's a raccoon, one's a tree, of course they're going to be friends." End quote. Rocket was reintroduced in a prison cell, with his girlfriend gone from the picture, and a newfound love for guns and violence. However, he still retained his heroism, politeness, and respect for authority. His years of experience made him more mature and rounded out, but no less noble. The team had a dynamic that worked, and after the series, they decided to stick together and name themselves the Guardians of the Galaxy. They starred in an ongoing series written by Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning, which was the basis for the eventual movie. Rocket's insults around this time amounted to "geez Louise" at worst. He greeted strangers by calling them Mr. Again and again, he brandished huge weapons, but never forgot to be a gentleman. However, the book was short-lasting, soon to be canceled by low sales. It took the movie to get the characters out of obscurity and primed for a relaunch. And if the series wanted to last longer this time, it needed to follow the more popular version. This would be Rocket's second stage, and it was then that Rocket's degradation began. Synergy between comic books and comic movies has always been a topic of controversy. Every time a movie is released, comics change to follow the more popular product. But it wasn't until the release of Thor that Marvel admitted Marvel Studios interfered with the comics. Thor writer Matt Fraction said that, quote, "When I got the book, there was a Thor movie coming, and there were these kind of guidelines that I had to execute under." End quote. This happened with Guardians of the Galaxy as well, despite the relaunch coming out before the movie. The new writer, Brian Michael Bendis, worked with the movies as a creative consultant and had access to early scripts. Bendis was upfront about the movie influences. Quote, "Everyone knows they're making a Guardians of the Galaxy movie now, but for a while, in secret, the creative committee has been helping out Marvel Studios. For the last year or two, we've been going over the characters and talking about them and thinking about what kind of movie would it be. With that conversation comes, what kind of comics should they be? I read the last draft of the script." End quote. Meanwhile, the writers who wrote the stories that made the movie possible were never considered. As Abnett put it, "I think it's only fair to say that we haven't really been consulted in any way, shape, or form." The new creative team seemed to flaunt their lack of respect for what came before. "I've never delved into the cosmic Marvel, either through my reading or drawing," said the artist Steve McNiven. "I've had to cram decades worth of old comics down my throat since I missed most of the Marvel books growing up," said the editor, Steve Wacker. Most importantly, Bendis tweeted, "I never read any back issue of Guardians of the Galaxy." Supposedly, the first script of the movie, written by Nicole Perlman, followed the comics very closely, but this changed when James Gunn came aboard. Gunn rewrote the script entirely because it didn't work for him. Quote, "It's not about the same stuff, but that's how the Writers Guild of America works. They like to credit first writers an awful lot." End quote. While the comic book had been lighthearted, it had a dark undercurrent that followed the tradition of British science fiction comics. Gunn's script changed the lens into a full-on comedy, and with it, the entire franchise had to change too to follow suit.
Ooga chaka, ooga, ooga, ooga,
I can't
chaka,
stop
ooga,
this
ooga,
feeling
ooga, chaka, ooga, ooga,
deep
ooga,
inside
chaka,
of
ooga,
me.
ooga, chaka.
You could see this shift in tone even in the interviews leading up to the comic book relaunch. "I've tackled this book with the agenda that this is the Cosmic Avengers," Bendis would say, contradicting the original intentions of the editor back in 2008. Quote, "The goal was, when we were forming the books, we didn't want to do the varsity. We didn't want to do the Avengers. We wanted to do the underdogs, the scrappy, outgunned freaks. So someone asked if we wanted to do the big guns, and I said, no. I like the freaks and geeks. It was the more quirky characters you connect to. End quote. These are B, C, D, and Z-list characters, Abnett said, echoing the sentiment. If we can make you care about those characters, then it's sort of like giving you a blank slate to work with. There are also more storytelling possibilities because since there's Z-list, you don't know what's going to happen to them. They could actually die. You just don't know who could survive from one issue to the next. That has great possibilities as a writer. If you're writing Superman, Batman, or Spider-Man, you know they'll be back the next month. But if you're writing Groot, or Rocket Raccoon, or Monstrous, who knows who is going to make it to the next issue? End quote. The movie was such a smashing success that it allowed for a whole family of related books to come out next to the Guardians title, and Scotty Young was chosen to write the second Rocket Raccoon solo series in decades. But the whole editorial project was missing the point of why the 2008 series was interesting enough to merit being turned into a movie. Abnett and Lanning's book was very hardcore sci-fi, Bendis would say. And I said, I'll come at it from more of an original Star Wars, Firefly. That'll be my touchstone. A little more the way I like my sci-fi. End quote. Scotty Young, meanwhile, called Rocket and Groot Han and Chewie. This was the very thing the previous writers were trying to avoid. As Abnett said, quote, my concern was that Groot would just be this sort of Chewbacca who went along with Rocket and didn't do too much apart from fire his gun and say a few things. End quote. The original intention was to avoid comparisons with the most mainstream standard piece of sci-fi. The new approach was to seek them and be as generic as possible, and it was all because of Gunn's movie. As the issues started coming out, the old fans' worst fears were proven right. This is an essay about Rocket, but a big portion of the characters were turned into the opposite of what they used to be. In the original series, the Guardians were heroes, unapologetically, shamelessly heroic. Star-Lord's reputation was so great, enemies would rather lie down their weapons than harm him. When he was believed to be dead, he was honored with a statue on a capital planet. After the movie, Peter got a solo series called Legendary Star-Lord. The title fitted until he realized it was meant to be ironic because of the movie.
Hey, you know what? There's another name you might know me by. Star-Lord. Who?
It got memes, so it was inconsequential to contradict previous material. Funnily enough, this would span memes of its own. The final Abnett and Lanning story ended with Star-Lord dying in an epic battle against Thanos in an alternate universe called the Cancerverse, as it imploded around them. When the Guardians were brought back, Star-Lord's return was a dangling mystery. However, he acted so different from his old self that people started joking he had been replaced by a Cancerverse Lovecraftian abomination masquerading as him. Not just because he was way less professional now, or because he became obsessed with his dad, just because early scripts of the movie were about Star-Lord's parentage. Even his hair was wrong, with the new Star-Lord being blonde when he used to be a brunette. The jokes just got worse when Bendis finally got around to telling the story of how Star-Lord escaped the Cancerverse. It wasn't told through an objective flashback, but rather through the sus Star-Lord telling the story, and he got so many things wrong it almost seemed to confirm the jokes. Every detail contradicted the old arc. The Cancerverse no longer imploded. Characters who were heroes now acted as villains, and Nova, who was there too, forgot the girlfriend he was dating back then and professed his undying love for Gamora before sacrificing himself in a speech so tacky, it read like Star-Lord making it up with serious, his last wish was that you wouldn't suffer alone and accepted me as your new lover energy. Moving along to the rest of the team, Drax went from a smart and cold assassin modeled after Riddick to a dumb brute who couldn't understand sarcasm. Groot went from trying to conquer Earth and being picked by the editor because he was essentially Doctor Doom to a, quote, gentle philosopher of the Marvel Universe, end quote. Bendis likened the Guardians to pirates because, quote, whenever they're around, everybody else feels nervous, end quote. Even Abnett followed the program when he released a new novel about Rocket. Quote, Rocket and Groot's entire lives revolve around running, either into trouble or away from it. Clearly they are rogues, renegades for whom the entire universe is a source of unexpected difficulty that they are obliged to evade. End quote. In the first issue of Bendis's series, Rocket got a new catchphrase. Blam! Murdered you! Which said more than 1,000 pictures. Abnett added to it. Quote, do not call him adorable. Ever. If you do that, he will shoot you to death as many times as necessary. He has a very specific moral code. Flark everything and everyone. End quote. In Scotty Young's series, someone attempts to pet Rocket, only to end up violently beat up. In his original book, Rocket was petted to much delight, and the raccoon asked if he could be scratched a little lower. In Abnett and Lanning's series, Rocket saved a planet from evil aliens called the Badoon. This world is now under protection of the Guardians of the Galaxy, Rocket said proudly. There were no demands. In Bendis's series, the Guardians protected a planet from the Badoon again, but this time Rocket demanded a reward. Quote, undying gratitude doesn't pay the bills. End quote. Nowadays, Rocket and Groot are inseparable, but in 2008, Rocket's best friend was actually Star-Lord. Under Bendis, Star-Lord told Rocket he was one of the good ones. Rocket responded, what? Cut it out, Quill. You're creeping me out. Earnest friendship was too awkward for roguish pirates. In another issue, a bounty hunter faces Rocket and Groot. She's glad she'll get to pick up the bounty of a lifetime. Rocket says, well, thanks. It's nice to know my lifetime of hard work has been noticed. When he realizes the bounty hunter was referring to Groot, Rocket says, aw, come on. Really? How do you have a higher bounty than me? How? I commit crimes. I steal stuff. I steal stuff all the time. I stole a rocket ship from a baby. In yet another story, Rocket states he's wanted in 6 systems. This might sound similar to how in the movie, Rocket says he's escaped 22 prisons. The comics rushed to follow suit, putting him in 3 prisons in quick succession, not even bothering to explain why he's there sometimes. When a reporter interviews Groot about why he does what he does, Groot replies by saying, I am Groot, several times. Rocket gets angry and starts arguing with him. Did you say to bring honor between species? No such thing. We do it for the money and the fame. Period. For the kids? What kids? What are you talking about? We discussed this. Money, fame. What's all this mushy stuff? Role models? Us? That's it. What are we? Guardians for charity now? End quote. Another addition from the movie was to reframe Rocket's origin as the tragic result of painful and illegal genetic and cybernetic experiments. This was reflected on Bendis's comic, and even Abnett's novel. The movie updated Rocket's design to add visible mechanical parts over scars in his body. The comics eventually copied this too. In the old comics, a computer scanned Rocket and concluded he was a Terran life form. He was explicitly Terran, from Earth. This was echoed several times. The movie, again, changed things.
The key to Rocket is he doesn't necessarily know or care that he's a raccoon. And if you point that out to him, he's not particularly pleased about it.
Of course, the Rocket from the comics now hated being called a raccoon. Abnett said Rocket and Groot were, and I quote, enormous fun to write because they're funny, but one of the most interesting things about them is writing them in a way where they're also credible. There's a reason for there being a talking raccoon and a talking tree, even in a universe where anything can happen. It's giving them a context so they're not cartoon characters, but proper creations. They're creatures who live in a broader universe and may be slightly unconventional, but the questions we're interested in are what can you do with them? And what details can you seed into their personality that makes sort of sense of them? With Rocket in particular, there's a danger of thinking, oh well, he's just a funny talking animal. We want to suggest that there is more to him than that, because that makes him more interesting and cooler, end quote. In comparison, Scotty Young said, quote, Rocket is this cute, fuzzy character that we've kind of turned into a stuffed animal, end quote. Abnett's modern novel proceeded to stress that Rocket walks upright in a way that makes you want to exclaim, look at the little man, look at, walking on his back paws, aww. That's a direct quote. Rossman, the 2008 series editor, had this to say, we would play Rocket straight. He makes jokes, but we don't belittle or make fun of him. Let's not mock him. Let's show why he's cool, end quote. So how could these contradictions be reconciled? Do we just scratch all the old comics as outside of continuity? That might work in DC, but Marvel has never really rebooted since it's begun. No, another play was in order. But before we get to that, I'd like to reproduce the words of a famous anecdote that made the rounds in comic book circles around 2014. This story is anonymous, and so it cannot be proven, but I'll let you be the judge.
When I was 6 years old, I got the flu and my mom bought me a box of old comics to help make me feel better. First one I pulled was Rocket Raccoon number 2. Shit was weird but cool. I constantly remembered the comic randomly throughout my life. When I was a sophomore in high school, I googled Raccoon superhero because what the fuck was that comic I read years ago? I rediscovered Rocket Raccoon, learned about Guardians of the Galaxy, and it looked fucking awesome. I bought a paperback of classic Rocket Raccoon and one of Abnett and Lanning's Guardians. I got super into comics, mostly Marvel cosmic stuff. Then the Guardians movie was announced. I got hyped as fuck. Then the Bendis comics came out. What the fuck was this shit? Moving forward, I was in my second year of college. Grades had been bad last semester, friends didn't want to hang out, family was kind of ignoring me, and my favorite comics were getting fucking terrible now. I entered a super deep depression. Even though my problems were fixable, I didn't want to live on this planet anymore. I don't know why I got so sad. Life just seemed hopeless, I guess. Felt alone, like nobody gave a shit about me. I decided to kill myself after I saw the Guardians movie. I got to see it a day early. I enjoyed the fuck out of it because I assumed it would be my last. I'd never gotten that emotional at a movie before. I lip-synced the words to Moonish Daydream when it played in the movie because it was my favorite song. I teared up a bit when Rocket was drunk and yelling about how people treated him like shit, and there were a few tears when Groot sacrificed himself. The movie ended. It was great. Parents offered to pick me up and take me home for some reason. Friends started texting me like crazy. How was the movie? Want to see it together? I'll pay for the tickets. Parents got there and told me they wanted to ask me about how it was in person. I suddenly realized people gave a shit about me. I felt like I mattered. I decided suicide would be a retarded thing to do. If I'd never read that one Rocket Raccoon comic when I was little, I might be dead right now. Rocket Raccoon essentially saved my life. Might sound stupid as fuck, I don't know. The Rocket Bendis writes isn't the Rocket I know. That Rocket isn't the Rocket that showed me how amazing comics are.
Now, don't take me as saying the movie only brought bad things.
The next award to be presented is the Bill Finger Award for Excellence in Comic Book Writing. Here to announce this year's recipients are writer Mark Evanier and Bill Finger's granddaughter, Finger.
The next Finger Award is for Bill Mantlo. Bill went to work for Marvel Comics as a Bill Mantlo, absolutely.
Here's Mike Mantlo telling an important story about his brother, the creator of Rocket. Quote, Bill was going through a bitter divorce battle when he discovered a new passion, rollerblading. He took to it like a fish to water, entering competitive events around NYC's Central Park and skating marathon distances daily. It was a hot July afternoon in 1992 when he was skating home to his apartment in Upper Manhattan when a maniacal driver whipped around a corner in front of Bill, throwing him across the hood of the car. His head smashed into the windshield, and when thrown off the other side, his head hit the pavement as the driver sped away. Rushed to the emergency room of St. Luke's Hospital, he was in a coma and diagnosed with a closed-head traumatic brain injury. The prognosis was bleak and proved to be as devastating as all of us feared it might be. Despite a few false glimmers of hope during his first 3 years post-injury, Bill has never recovered the cognitive skills that were stolen from him. End quote. He was just 41 at the time of the accident, the father of 2 children. When the movie approached, many outlets protested over the fact that the movie would make billions while Bill would get pennies in royalties. However, his brother Mike said these accusations were way off base. Marvel negotiated and agreed to a compensation package for the rights to use Bill's character, and thanks to their acknowledging Bill's contributions, he was able to leave the institution he'd lived in since 1995 and have the in-home care he needed. The drama climaxed when Bill was granted a private screening of the movie. As Mike put it, and I quote, "Bill thoroughly enjoyed it, giving it his highest compliment. 2 big thumbs up." When the credits rolled, his face was locked into the hugest smile I've ever seen him wear, along with 1 or 2 tears of joy. It was the greatest day of the last 22 years for Bill and our family. In fact, Bill had the happiest day of his life. End quote.
He was a really good writer, and he wrote a lot of books that a lot of people wouldn't want to have written because they didn't think they could do well, and he managed to do them beautifully. But more importantly, he was also a great person. I remember one summer he rented a house, I believe it was in upstate New York or Vermont, and just to get away. So what was the first thing he did trying to be alone was he called the entire Marvel staff and had us come and spend the weekend with him and just treated us wonderfully. Bill was a great guy, a great writer. I wish to God he was picking this up for himself. We will get it to him. Thank you very much.
The blame for all the confusion going on in the comics lay not with the movie, but with the insecure comic writers. With Rocket being such a niche character, there was little hope any writer would even be aware of what was going on. But, like with Bill, Rocket got a happy ending too. Enter Al Ewing. This British writer got his start writing for 2000 AD, the seminal British comic book, much like Abnett and Lanning. When Ewing made his way to Marvel, he stood out for his encyclopedic knowledge of old trivia. In fact, he seemed to take joy in bringing back the original sauce of characters to add texture and depth to their modern versions. Ewing put his method to work on Rocket when he wrote Rocket, a 6-issue miniseries from 2017. Ewing saw the heroic ranger, acknowledged the corrupted pirate, and from that thesis and antithesis brought forth a third way. A raccoon who was rough, but only because he had to let go of his innocence, which constantly haunted him inside. Every time the reader had to endure Rocket's new cruelty, Rocket was silently screaming along with them. His changes were now framed as the narrative of a hero breaking bad, like the protagonist of a Richard Stark novel. To quote Ewing, Rocket had an entirely different life long ago that he doesn't like to talk about. He was pretty much a totally different person back then. A much less troubled one. Occasionally, bits and pieces of that old life will surface. Someone will get past his defenses by reminding him of the old days. Or he'll have retained a piece of kit from his time as Ranger Rocket. But to remember is painful. It's a very noir trope, the old good time that the hero lost and can never get back. The long-buried sadness. End quote. Ewing revealed that after Rocket left his home planet in his first series, his hypersensitive touch and hearing led him to crack safes, and that's how he ended up in jail when Star-Lord met him. Now there was a timeline for Rocket's development. Leaving his home planet meant leaving his innocence behind, even metaphorically, as comics left behind the relative innocence of the 80s. In the final issue of Ewing's poignant story, Rocket gets shot in the head. He set up a way to swap bodies, so he'll be fine. But his synapses misfire from the damage, and he starts recalling old memories, seeing phantoms of everything and everyone he's lost. He sees himself in his home planet, flying with his rocket skates gleefully. Suddenly, he starts falling, and phantoms tell him it's because of the extra weight of his sins. Quote, "How many have you killed now? Sorry, I mean murdered. Blam! Murdered you! Haha!" Rocket stutters in response. I'm not this, whoever this is. That's somebody else. Then, the worst phantom appears, his old love, Lila. "Don't you remember, love?" she says. "We left Half-World to explore the universe. And as our lives changed, we changed too. And one day I wasn't your love anymore. You left. I married. And we were happy. Without you there." Rocket struggles to speak. Quote, I don't know what happened. What happened to me? I lost something. I don't even know when or what it was." Finally, the visions trail off, leaving the reader to ponder those haunting words. On the epilogue, the narrator reads, "Rocket sat in a bar that was as empty as he was, and he looked at a photo he carried around of somebody else. When Star-Lord arrives to pick him up, Rocket gets up to leave. Peter asks him why he's leaving behind a photo of himself. "That's not me," Rocket answers. "That's somebody else." In the final shot of the story, we zoom in on the photo, which depicts Rocket and Lila in Half-World during what could be a lost panel of the original 1985 series. That past was gone, but now we knew Rocket carried it with him. Western comics never end, so neither does this story. Many of the examples of bad characterization I quoted were published after Ewing's Reckoning. Rocket will never leave all of his movie personality behind, especially when doing cameo appearances in other books where the writers might not care about complex history past what they've seen in theaters. I've not even gotten into the fact that my beloved Abnett and Lanning wrote a story in which Rocket learned all of his happy memories were fake and he actually came from a dark and edgy prison planet. This was before the movie, and ever since then, it's never been clear which memories are the true ones. This probably contributed to the feeling Rocket didn't have a concrete backstory to respect. The reason I don't consider this retcon as damaging is because it showed the change. If Bendis had introduced his new Rocket in a story that showed him turn into the movie version, I probably would still be mad, but not enough to make this video. Regardless, the process will keep happening. Marvel characters never die, and in 100 years, when the Marvel Cinematic Universe has rebooted at least 3 times, and Rocket appears as a completely different character, the comics will just shamelessly adopt that too. The comic industry is a small one. A popular issue might sell 100,000 copies, while a movie 1 billion tickets. It's in the comic's best interests to seek growth, but it shouldn't be at the cost of leaving the original fans behind. In the hiatus between the second and third movies, Ewing became the writer of the main Guardians of the Galaxy book. He wasted no time in making them the most respected authorities of the cosmos, superheroes and legends again. Although the book was cancelled incredibly quickly, echoing what happened in 2008, Ewing clearly has stayed fond of Rocket, recently writing a one-shot story in which he acknowledged Rocket's contradictory memories and pointing out someone should get working on that. With the third movie being focused on Rocket, his popularity is bound to explode once again, and he'll most definitely get a new book. We can only hope the character doesn't take too many steps backwards, and if we're feeling especially hopeful, that other characters can go through the journey Rocket did. Who knows? We might learn why Groot stopped speaking like Dr. Doom one day. Thanks for watching.